card betting masterclass. I've just made a quick little lower third for everyone. This is exciting stuff. My first question, mate, is what's kind of like if you just can give us like an overall summary of your weekly process from the starting point of creating those spreadsheets for everyone, inputting all the data to the point where you come on a podcast like this, or you go and place your own bets.
Yeah, so obviously, I started kind of coming on here due to the fact I had the Twitter, and obviously I do the spreadsheets for cards. Obviously with different variant rather than just a total. It's got everything, first half, second half, averages, that kind of thing. It's quite time consuming on a weekly basis doing it. However, obviously I enjoy the process of doing it simply because, when you're inputting all of that data, little bits kind of stick out and just jog in your memory, like, oh, right, okay. So you notice trends as the weeks go by and you're inputting this data. The joy of doing it is, like I said, you spot those trends and you can like, all right, I'm doing this one a lot, or this has happened a lot, actually. I'll keep an eye on that. How much further has that come back without me realizing? And then all of a sudden, the good thing about being in betting a long time and sort of knowing about different teams is, you can sit there and study all you like, but a lot of the time it's just what you remember and what you know about teams, about cards, about referees, so that you know what you're actively keeping an eye out for. But yeah, so it kind of goes through the process of, I'll put this data in because I've got the section where it goes into card totals, averages per game, like I mentioned. I've also got the section that goes into the top 5 most fouls and the top 5 teams who commit the most fouls in each league, sort of per game. And it's like anything, you can dive deeper within that. So there's plenty of sites you can go on to. So, you can separate that into home and away. Does a certain team commit more fouls when they're playing away compared to a home, and vice versa? And then you obviously get the referee section as well, because for me, there is always sort of 3 parts of a game that I like to see if I'm going to have a go on cards. So first of all, I want to see what their average is, but I want to dive a little bit deeper. I don't just want to look at a team, they see on average 2.38 per game, so chances are I should see 2 or more cards. It's not as simple as that, because, for example, you could have one, say it's out of 10 games, they might have seen a mixture of 1 or 2 for a number of games, but one game might have just been ridiculous where they saw 8 and the other team saw 4. Like, it's just kicked off. You just don't know, and it's not a fair reflection then on the averages of that team in terms of the cards that they get. So you need to sort of dive a little bit deeper into that. But again, doing the sheets allows me to kind of have that now. So I know that team consistently sees at least 2 or at least 3 per game. But I then like to obviously have a look at the fouls and fouls committed, because I think there's a perfect one I had week just gone. I did put it in the YouTube video, but I thought there'd be cards in general, but I was very confident in Oxford to pick up at least two yellow cards or more, because you had, for example, Peterborough, who see the most fouls in the league. They're kind of like the Aston Villa of that division. They win a lot of fouls, are very attacking, and they just get fouled often. And Oxford actually commit the most fouls per game. They commit more fouls than anyone else on average. Given the fact that Peterborough are currently, top of the league, fighting to be, obviously go up as champions, it kind of just made sense. I think Oxford are going to be under the cosh here somewhat. They've had a bit of a stutter in recent weeks. Peterborough are absolutely flying. So, on paper, you say, well, Peterborough should be winning this one. Obviously, it's never that simple. But I thought Oxford are going to be on the back foot, regardless of whether Peterborough score or not. There's going to be a lot of occasions when Oxford are going to be making those fouls just because of the type of team they are. So, and with the referee that was in charge, so sorry to go back, once I had that knowledge and once I kind of had that, I was looking at the sort of, the per game averages as well, but that's more of a guideline. I wouldn't necessarily always base a bet on that. And the referee as well, I'm trying to recall who it was now, but he had a very good cards per game average, and he'd had history with both of these sides before. And I know we often speak about head-to-heads on here, and how they're not. Sometimes they can be relevant. I mean, for me personally, when I'm looking at head-to-heads, I tend to only want to sort of look, if it's later on the season as we're in now, you can kind of look at the reverse fixture this season, because chances are the teams are the same, most things are the same. Yeah, 4 might have dipped a bit, but that's kind of as far as I like to go. And in the reverse fixture, Peterborough actually saw more cards than Oxford, but Oxford still picked up 2 cards. And that one came in. So it's just kind of looking, for me, ticking off a bit of a list that I like to look at. So yes, obviously got the cards per game averages, but looking at who commits the most fouls, where are they playing against the teams that see a lot of fouls, but not just that. What's the motivation of each team? Where are they trying to get? What importance has been put on this game? who is the referee? Does he have previous with these clubs? You know, what's his last 20 games look like in terms of averages that he's handed out as well? So that's kind of the process that I go through, really. In terms of sort of player cards, again, I think player cards are great prices, but they're more for a little bit of fun, I think, rather than a consistent long-term kind of process of building profit. If I'm having a look at a player card, there's, again, plenty of sites you can look for sort of action areas over a season, as to what team, which side teams like to attack, who are those players up against, who's their most foul player in the squad, how many times in the last 5 or 10 games has who that player's been up against seen a card, and things like that. But again, those are more for fun. I think team cards and match cards are the way that I like to, long term be profitable. But yeah, that's pretty much the process. I hope that was an in-depth enough answer for you.
No, I think the interesting thing that you mentioned there was that, like, you're not just using the data, you're also implementing kind of your footballing knowledge about how certain teams are performing. So I guess from what I gathered from that is, let's just pick an example out of the Premier League, Man United versus City this weekend. You would think City are going to be the dominant team in that game, and maybe you like a bet on looking at the statistics. You're looking at a bet and saying, I reckon, United are a good chance of committing 2 or more cards or getting 2 or more cards this weekend. And also, they're going to be under the cosh for most of the game. So that kind of, I guess
it's situational as well, though, because particularly when teams play against City and Liverpool, they're fast paced, but more often than not, teams can't get near Liverpool or City in terms, to make a challenge. If they do make a challenge, it's because they've been got past and they're trying to make up for a mistake that they've made. So you don't often see that many fouls in City or Liverpool games, which sounds crazy. You think, but they've got all the possession and they're pinning a team back. But because the ball is moving so quickly, players can't get near. It's more a case of, kind of getting the blocks in. They're not getting close enough to make those nasty challenges. So, for example, I love derby days in general. Also, games where the big six go against each other, as we've already covered. I think when Nigel's been on the podcast, they flatter to deceive more often than not. Everyone's expecting there to be fireworks, loads of goals, loads of this, loads of that. And how many times do we sit at the end of that saying, well, that's 90 minutes, I'm never getting back because it was the most boring thing you've ever seen. And on derby days and things like that, I do notice sometimes the lines are quite high because it's almost like they're expecting, we hope that we're going to see absolute fireworks and it just kick off because it's a derby, but more often than not, it doesn't. So a lot of the time, it's not just in goals, but in cards as well can be the way to go, particularly in games of massive importance.
Yeah. So I just think it's interesting that you don't exactly use the spreadsheets and then look at the referees and go, 100%. I like what I see both here. Like, you kind of use your situational football kind of knowledge too. Have you ever thought of using kind of data? I don't know if you could. I mean, it would make it a lot more complicated process, but implementing just general football data in there, I don't know, maybe stuff like XG and to kind of determine how dominant a team is at that current time or anything like that?
I mean, potentially, but as you said, it does take obviously a lot more work and it's very time consuming doing what I do already. But also my focus is kind of cards, but I never wanted them to just sort of be a case of, I look at them, they see 2.3 whatever cards per game. They're not on the most fouled list, but that's still got a high card number and that referee's decent. I don't want it to be like that at all. If anything, it's more of, I always want it to be a guideline so that people can kind of cross-reference it and think, right, well, that's the fixture I like because of that and because of that. So those are 2 angles. Those are 2 reasons that I do really like it. Now, let me go and try and find some other reasons as well. So it kind of implores you to, now that you've got that idea of, well, this is why I like this game, but what other reasons can I find to back my point up or dissuade me from making a bad bet? So that they are kind of mainly sort of a guideline for people to be able to pick bets out for themselves and then go away and research a bit more. Because I think everyone who kind of follows this podcast, listens to other podcasts, is on sort of the betting sphere of Twitter. They all, the majority of them want to kind of learn to be better and learn how to make these decisions themselves and how to research and find out really good value bets. some people are just like, I can't be bothered to do any research. I'd rather just be able to see and just whack that on. Like, you get some of that, of course, but the majority want to learn how to be better. So I felt like my sheets, if I can help someone have a look at, these angles and oh, right, actually that, I do quite like this one. What else can I find for it? Then I feel like I've done my bit and helped someone else out. So that's kind of what they're for. But I think implementing kind of XG, there's so much data out there for XG. So whereas with cards, I feel like, it's a very up and coming popular market to do now, whereas I'd say a couple of years ago, it wasn't that popular really. So in terms of that, I think I found my niche and what I'm successful at and what I really like looking. I watch football in terms of from the perspective of cards, and so I do. It's just the way. So, for example, the way City play, I love it. Obviously, as a City fan, but of how intense they are, and how many they do put in some questionable challenges at time, but they've mastered the art of kind of getting away with it. But when you're looking at it from a cards perspective, the way you watch football when you're into cards is completely different to how if you want to watch goals. So I love the art of defending. I love watching that, and I love how organised people are. So when people moan about, but everyone's just sitting back against City, and you've got to admire it, if anything, because it takes so much organisation and concentration. But it's because I'm looking for the discipline side. So I think that's why I obviously like that. But yeah, I think in terms of XG, it's not something I'll implement into my page. As I said, there's a lot of data for that out there, which you can obviously find. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching City play Arsenal. I think it was the second time they played each other last year. I think it was like Arteta's first game against Pep. And I just remember like looking at the TV and just thinking, referee, can you not see that Rodri has committed like 5 on the borderline fouls?
Yeah.
Like, just please show him a colour. And they just master but the thing is, they just masters it like at fouling someone to the point where like they've gained a clear advantage, but not to the point where it's like you have to show them a yellow card. So it must be fun to watch, mate, because they at least from that one game I was watching, it was very, very frustrating. So I want to know, like, do you obviously come out with some kind of like percentage chance? Like, let's just say we'll use the Manchester United example again. Like, in their last 5 games, they committed 2 or more fouls 4 times out of 5 or something like that. Gives you an 80% percentage of them doing it again. I know that's like a very, very basic kind of way of looking at it. But then do you come up with a percentage of a team to get a certain amount of cards? So maybe you look at this weekend's game and say, statistically, I look at this and think there's a 70% chance that Manchester United are going to get 2 or more cards. Do you then compute that to the odds and say, all right, anything over, I don't know, I guess you can just use an odds converter unless you're good at maths, unlike me, and just know exactly what a 70% chance is in odds, and then compute that and see if you can get better than 70% odds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think obviously that's a good way of doing it. I mean, I'm quite similar to Nigel. I started betting when I was quite young. I mean, this year I'm 29, and I started betting obviously, I think when I was about 18. So I've been betting for almost 11 years. And it's amazing how far betting's come along recently, in the past, even 5 years, in terms of, beating the closing lines, that kind of thing. I'm quite similar to Nigel in that I'll come up with odds in my head of what I think something should be. And if this price is higher than that, in my opinion, that's value because it's higher than what I think it should be. So I'm kind of always going off in my head over the long run. If I can find odds that beat my prices, I'll be profitable. But I do understand in terms of, so this has happened in 4 out of the last 5, but I don't think it's as easy as that. And you can make data kind of, you can go as deep into it as you like. So, I mean, for me, you can either go, oh, well, this team has seen 2+ cards in 4 out of the last 5 games. Okay, great. What was the importance of those games? Who were those games against? Was it against teams in the lower half? Was it against teams in the relegation zone? Were those tackles against teams that are fouled, the top 5 most fouled often? So it's the last 5. It doesn't tell me anything about the teams that they've faced. So, because you could come up against someone who rarely gets fouled, doesn't really do a lot. So chances are United won't see those cards, But no, for me, I'll weigh up kind of all of those things, and in my head, I'll have a price in mind of what I think it should be. And if the odds offered are longer than that, then in my book that's value. And that's kind of always what I've gone with. I've always gone along with that. So if I've got an ideal bet, I'll always have an ideal bet in mind of what I think, and then I'll give it a price. And if it's lower than that, I won't touch it. Simple as that. Because I enjoy it. And I think the big thing is, I know amongst my circle, because I come from sort of a small village really, and a lot of them sort of, but I just kind of want to have a bet just to make things interesting. I don't really care about any of that. And it's like, well, you can do that, but if you want to be profitable, you have to be disciplined in that. If it's not value, if it doesn't beat your idea of a line, or if you just think, it's not a great price, but I'll have a go anyway, you won't be profitable long term. Learn to say no as well. Like, even if there's a bet, that if I could have a quid for every time I thought, do you know what, I absolutely love this bet, this is such a good bet, and when prices are released, I'm definitely going to get on it as long as it's over this, and the odds are way below it, and I've just had to skip it, and it's annoying. You just watch it fly in because it's a winning bet, but ultimately at those odds, it's just, there's no value in it, so I'm not taking it. So it's so important to, in my opinion, I'm not saying it's the only way, but in my opinion, if something beats my ideal odds for it of what I think it is, it's value, and that's when I'll pick it.
Yeah, and I think your strategy really works for someone that's like immersed in the world, because you're spending hours watching games, you're spending hours inputting the data, so you're like, it's not like, I'm waiting here on a Friday night, Saturday morning for you to just post your sheets and then I'll have a look and see anything that I like and go have a bet. Like, you're watching so many games, inputting all this data, so like you can almost, come up with a price, like you said, in your own head, whereas it might be harder for people who are just kind of, just looking for a couple of minutes or maybe an hour every weekend. I think you're probably going to come up with a lot more accurate price in your head than someone who doesn't spend the amount of time that you do. So would you kind of be wary of like advising that strategy to someone who isn't as immersed in the card betting world as yourself?
But then ultimately, if they're not kind of immersed in that and sort of just looking for your bet, chances are they're just doing it for a bit of fun. So it's kind of a little bit casual that they don't really mind, which is absolutely fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I guarantee the ones are sort of like, no, I want to be doing this well, I want to be trying to make a profit out of this, will then go and think, right, okay, that doesn't seem like a very good price. But with cards, what's good is I find that you can almost tell that, well, that price for what I need to happen, that is not a very good price. Like, when I first started out on cards, I found that I was just sort of like, well, for what I need to happen here and what's happened before, that seems quite low. And then as the more that happened, or I think that's a bit high, that's when, these things happen. That's when you sort of get an idea of, right, okay, these are the prices I think these should be at then. But for someone who's just sort of wants to know a bit more, that's why I kind of started the YouTube channel as well, because I wanted to, when I did the games of the week, just the write-ups or my games of interest for a weekend, they were quite popular. People always wanted to see them, and because it gave them a focus of what games that they can then concentrate on. So that's kind of another reason why I started that channel, because you can sort of speak to people about what games they like, but then they can listen to you talk about, I've applied all of this into these games, and that's why I like them. They're not always going to come off. I think first week I did the YouTube channel, I think each game had at least four cards or something like that. And I think the most was about 8 or 9. But then the week just gone, one of them had 7 cards. One had absolutely no cards, and that was an Italian game, which was just beyond belief. But it happens. But ultimately, this process that has proven long-term profitability for me is what I'm using to choose my games of interest for said weekend, which is why I started that channel. So for those people who are like, I'll just have a look at it and put a bet on, they can have a look at that and think, right, I'll put something on for these games then, because those are the games that I feel. So it's all kind of a process, really, all from the Twitter to the YouTube and everything like that. It's all to kind of like point people in the right direction and sort of act as guidelines, really. And I enjoy that. I get a lot of nice messages saying, oh, thanks, I've sort of applied this and this has worked. And it's great to see, and it's sort of great to hear, and that it's actually working for other people as well, because that's how the whole thing started. It was working for me. I was just doing it on my own. I didn't post them. I just did my own spreadsheets, and it was working for me. And I was like, maybe other people like this as well. And it's gone down quite clearly. It's gone down all right. So, yeah.
Do you this is something I try and do anytime I like, or I'm looking at a UFC fight or a rugby game or something like that is I try and price up the game in my head or come up with some kind of percentage chance before I look at the odds. And it's something that I try and do, but sometimes I literally just forget and I go, oh, I wonder what the price is, and then I'm like, oh, I should have thought of what I wanted before. Do you try and do that, or are you kind of the same as me and forget most of the time?
Yeah, I do forget a lot of the time. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, what's the price? And because you can do it two ways, can't you? You can look at the price and think, hang on, I don't agree with that. I think it's this, as we want to do. What price would I give that right now? Just going to have a look. But yeah, I'm like you. The amount of times that I just like, oh, what's the price on that? And then, oh no, I should have guessed it. I should have guessed what I thought mine was. But no, I think for me, it's something I want to make more of an active effort to do. I'm good at seeing odds and thinking, nah, that's too low. Or, yeah, that's too high. But no, I do want to get better at thinking, right, what odds am I going to give that for this weekend, and just sort of seeing how they tally up. No, I need to get better at that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good habit to get into the habit of doing, because you can be biased by, looking at the odds and thinking, I think that should be lower, or I think that should be higher, or whatever. And have a think yourself before, because I think it's a really good tip for anyone out there who's, looking to explore certain betting avenues. Mate, is there a reason why you only, because most of the time, or at least all the time, I think you come on the podcast, you only ever talk about betting overs, I guess, or you're never talking about under 2.5 cards or under 1.5 cards or whatever. Is it more so just your style to be so negative and want to see so much violence, mate, or is it, or do you think it's just trying to be? I mean, card betting in itself is pretty niche. Are you just trying to be niche on top of niche, or like, what are we doing here?
Well, do you know, the ironic thing is, one of the games I'm going to talk about this evening is an unders bet.
Oh,
so normally it's more commonplace that I'll pick the overs, but it's because I think I do enjoy games that I think are going to see cards. So if I've got a choice between a game that I think that's definitely going to see cards, that should definitely happen, and I've got to pick one compared to one that I think will see the unders, then obviously I'll want to speak about the overs, just purely because the data always sounds much more positive when it's for something to happen, as opposed to when it's for something not to happen. For some reason, I'm not sure why, like psychologically, it just seems to be much more endearing and much more kind of captivating when you're talking about, well, this should happen because of this, that, and the other. Whereas as opposed to saying, well, no, it's because of this, and that, like, that won't happen, so have a go on that not happening. Do you know what I mean? So I think you naturally lean more towards things happening. And obviously, I've done well by it, but nevertheless, occasionally there are some very good unders bets. And, I do go on the unders as well. But it's more commonplace if I'm going to talk about ones I really like, it'll be the overs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I think going back to like some of the things you talked about earlier with the player betting, and you kind of said that it's kind of more of a fun thing that you like to do. Do you ever look at, like, are you constantly checking to see players that are on 4 yellow cards for the season and trying to predict scenarios where they might choose to, just pick out their suspension, thinking, let's just say, if you're let's just say this weekend you've got Southampton, Sheffield United, Southampton player on 4 cards. Next week he's got Burnley or something like that, and then the week after he's got a big game against Manchester City or something like that. So he wants to make sure he's ready for that. Do you think there are scenarios where can you actually predict those scenarios? Do you think logically where a player might choose to get that 5th yellow card for his suspension?
I think it's only kind of natural, to be honest. I mean, if I'm playing for a certain club and the game after the next one, we've got our fiercest rivals and it's a massive game, I want to be playing in it. But if I'm playing Burnley, as you said, sort of in the next game, I'd rather be missing that one than the derby. And I think it's only natural that even if a manager doesn't say, go out and get books, because they're never going to say that. But in your head, you're like, well, if I pick up a book in this game, it's not the end of the world because I only missed that one. It's just psychologically, that's the way players are surely going to think. Because if they get booked later on, they miss that massive game. It's a bit devastating, isn't it? Really, you want to be playing in the biggest games and the best games with the best atmosphere. Obviously, haven't had that at the moment, admittedly, but it's more commonplace that usually you do. You want to be playing against those big sides. So, but again, because they're fun bets for me, I think I don't have to look too deeply into that. I sort of think, well, psychologically as a human being, I'd do that. So it's worth having a go on it, particularly if it's a player that's going up against someone who's fouled often, or the player themselves is someone who commits a lot of fouls and is going to be in a precarious position a lot throughout the game. And and as time goes on, then there's definitely got to be some value there, because everything's kind of pointing towards it. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But particularly on player cards, the prices sometimes are so generous and so overpriced. It's insane. But yeah, in terms of your original question, absolutely. I think psychologically as a human being, that's got to be in there. I think there's one this season, actually. I think I'm trying to remember what the context was. It was to do with Messi, and it was for him to score and to be booked in the game. And I think he scored. in the last minute and took his top off, and that one came flying in. But I'm trying to remember the reason behind it now. But
Was it
sort of like,
it wasn't Maradona, was it, when he?
Yes, that was it. It was when Maradona passed away, and it was the first game after. And because everyone kind of thought, well, if he scores, chances are he's going to have something dedicated to Maradona, and he's going to get booked for taking his top off. And that's what it's thinking kind of that way, because not many people would think of even having a look at something like that. So it's taking a step back and looking at games and leagues, kind of just trying to put it into good words, really, but just sort of looking at it and looking ahead. So even the other week when we were talking with Nigel and sort of saying about he had City on a -1 handicap. I can't remember who it was against now, but for particular reasons, and the squad and then squabbling as well. And so it's looking for different bits of news, how it applies to the game currently. Maradona was Messi's his idol, complete idol, and they were very, very close, and he's just lost him. And then you've got to think, well, and if he's playing and he does take his top, like, chances are he's going to be emotional. He's going to have some sort of tribute to Maradona, and then he'll get booked for that. And it's very simple when you say it like that, but at the time, it's just, oh yeah, that's who thinks of that? That's great. So I didn't clock on until sort of later on. I think someone else sort of alerted me to it. I thought it would be an emotional game for Messi, but I didn't make the link of but he might take the top off, so he'll get booked. Someone else did that, but then I've had occasions where I've done similar things that other people haven't noticed. But if you're able to sort of look at what's going on in the world and how it affects football, it's amazing how often it can be profitable for you and how many different angles you can put together.
Yeah, there's so many cases of that. I mean, there's rule changes all the time in certain competitions. I remember the the rugby competition back home, the NRL, when they changed all the rules, and it was just going to make it a way faster, more points, all this kind of stuff. But I think like a lot of, from memory, I think a lot of bookmakers like factored in that there was going to be more points just because players were going to be more tired. But what they didn't factor in, something that I noticed, was that what it'll actually do is, like, the better teams or the good teams will get better, and they'll smash up these teams by even more. So you could get on some like serious, like I was getting on like ridiculous handicaps, like handicaps where, you would never believe a team could beat another team by 20, 30 points. And it was, and you're getting huge odds for it. And that was, but I mean, it only lasts for like a week or two, but it's just little things like that where you can think, I guess, think outside the box. And that was going to be my next question, was like, do you think these scenarios are factored into the odds? Because it's one thing to be like, I think he might pick up a card this weekend because he'll try to get his suspension. But if old mate at Bet365's gone, I'm thinking the same thing too, so I'm going to lower the price on X player. Do you think they do that too, or do you not think they think that thoroughly?
No, I don't think they. I'd imagine they apply a number of different sort of factors in terms of what helps them curate their odds. But things, for example, that Messi one, I don't think they cottoned on to that whatsoever. Absolutely not. That price for Messi to see a card and to score. I mean, Messi to score is you usually find that around evens if you're lucky. I mean, it's
1.01.
Yeah, exactly. But then with the card combined, I'm trying to recall what the odds were now, but it was far too overpriced. Given the significance of that game, it being the first one back for Messi since Maradona's death. there was no way they'd factored that in. I think if they had, it would be much, much shorter. So in some cases, yes, but quite often, no. There's, for example, the other good big thing about to keep an eye on is, when teams are released, when team sheets are sort of posted and you know who's starting with formations, having a look at where players usually play compared to where they are in that lineup. So chances are if you've got someone who's usually right winger playing at fullback, they might be overpriced for a card because Bet365's priced them up as a winger. But for all you know, if that club's not doing so well at the back in terms of injuries and they've had to put their right winger at right back, he's not as good a tackler as the people that are usually behind him. Could be brash, could be up against someone tricky, and he's been told to sit back out of position, quite familiar with it, and they've priced him up wrong. It's similar with obviously shots and stuff as well. When you get someone at right back playing right wing, and all of a sudden they're overpriced for shots, and they cotton on quickly. But if you can get on it as soon as those teams are released, you can get yourself some amazing prices.
Yeah, that is exactly what you just said about the goal scorer stuff. I was talking with Jeev, who's Jeev J. Ratnam is an odds compiler, and he was saying he's a goal scorer odds compiler. He was saying their worst nightmare is someone like at least last season, like a Bukayo Saka or Eric Peters, someone that you just don't know what position they're going to play, or at least maybe like for a couple of weeks they've shifted back to right back or whatever, or they've shifted forward to wing, if you know what I mean. And
I quite a decent. I used to get quite a decent bit on Eric Peters because often he'd be left back, but another time he'd be sort of much further forward, and it was waiting to see where he was playing. And where I sort of was right, I reckon I've got maximum of 5 minutes to get my picks on here before everyone cottons on those prices drop. But even like Eric Peters, just to get 2 shots on target, sometimes you just get obscene odds because they price him up as a left back. So it's things like that, keep an eye out on those kind of teams, those sort of players. But yeah, there's always opportunities. There's always opportunities there.
Yeah. Mate, my last question for the card betting masterclass was the big thing that you stated last time was you said the most overpriced market you think in cards is first half cards. Is that still the case basically 1 year later?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it is. I mean, not that the last week will have told, well, the last few weeks have told you that from my tipping and my best bets of the week after doing so well. Had a bit of a rough patch, but no, I still think they're massively overpriced. Even in games where teams like Spezia or Getafe who hate each other, if you go for over one card in the first half, more often than not, you're getting over evens for that. And in leagues such as that, that's ridiculous. Like how often do you see, you'll be looking through your app or whatever at a half-time score, whether it be the Serie A, whether it be La Liga or whatever, and there's already been like 3 or 4 cards in a game. So I think first half cards are very good in terms of their prices. But as time's gone on, I've sort of tweaked my sort of strategies a bit as well. So sometimes I like covering the 30 plus, the 40 plus booking marks in leagues that might not tend to have them because, for example, this season, I think on this podcast twice I tipped Reading's opponents to see 30 plus booking points. They didn't, and they're about 2 of the 4 opponents that Reading have had that haven't seen them. The rest have, so it's obviously a bit unlucky. But looking at teams like that, particularly in English leagues, seeing 30 or 40 plus booking points is usually very good price because more often than not, you maybe see about 2, 3 maximum. So anywhere above that, you get very good prices for. But no, overall, I'd say first half cards, massive value there in terms of being overpriced, but also sort of singular team higher booking points as well that can often happen. But yeah, so no, I'd still say that a year on,